The place was Egypt. The date, 70 BC. The tradition of mummification had been carried on by the Egyptians for thousands of years. It was an expensive business, only within the reach of the ruling class. But for several generations, the rulers of Egypt had been Romans. Did the attraction of an afterlife mean that these Romans had become believers in the Egyptian way of death? Some 1800 years later, an explorer crossing the Sahara stumbles on a mysterious ancient ruin. What is a huge temple doing here in the middle of the desert? And why do the hieroglyphs on it clearly show that the figure making an offering to the Egyptian gods is not an Egyptian, but their Roman ruler? While archaeologists strip the buildings of the Dakhla oasis of their blanket of sand, Egyptologist Christian Lurban sifts through the layers of complex evidence to reveal the truth about Egypt's realm of the dead. Egypt is famous for having been home to one of the world's great ancient civilizations. It flourished for over 3,000 years, beginning with the first pharaoh, who unified the country in 3100 BC. Narmer, as he's widely believed to have been called, was succeeded by a long succession of pharaohs. Most of the magnificent structures that we know and associate with ancient Egypt, including the pyramids at Giza and the temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak, date from this so-called dynastic era. In 332 BC, Egypt was conquered by the Greek Alexander the Great. Having founded the city of Alexandria, which was to become the capital, he left just a year later, and control of the country was claimed by his general, Ptolemy. Ptolemy's Greek descendants ruled Egypt as an independent Hellenistic country for 300 years. The last of his line, Cleopatra VII, famously committed suicide in 30 BC, following defeat at the hands of Octavian, later Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Egypt was now ruled for the first time from overseas. For many Egyptologists, it marked a period of cultural decline. For the Romans, though, it was the start of a golden period. Egypt brought them new wealth, and much more besides. In Egypt, they came across a complex belief system, different to their own, developed over thousands of years. A religion that offered something that must have been extremely attractive to the Romans: the promise of life after death. Christian Lurban is an Egyptologist at the Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany. He's been studying Egyptian culture for over 15 years, and like many fellow academics, never really felt that the Roman period was as interesting as dynastic Egypt, the time of the great pharaohs. But his views changed radically when he came across the story of his compatriot, explorer Gerhard Rolfs. Rolfs was the first European to cross Africa from the Mediterranean to the Gulf of Guinea. And in 1874, he stumbled on a temple at an oasis called Dakhla in the middle of the desert. Rolf's adventures spark Christian's imagination. He's particularly intrigued to find out more about the temple in the desert. Ancient Egypt is, after all, his subject. Like a good archaeologist, he decides to dig deeper. He starts a meticulous search through Berlin's archives for any record of Rolf's journeys. The trail leads him from one darkened storeroom to another. He finds records that look as though they've lain hidden for generations. Gradually, he closes in on his goal: what he believes will be Rolf's personal account of his Dakhla oasis discovery. But instead of a journal, what he finds there is something far more surprising. On the skull is clearly written the word Dakhla. Christian's curiosity is fired up more than ever. Instead of answers, his research has just thrown up more questions. There's only one way to get the answers he's looking for about the temple and now the skull. He decides it's time to forsake the halls of academia and get some dirt beneath his fingernails. His suitcase packed, he heads for the desert. Just a few hours away, Christian arrives in the teeming cauldron of humanity that is Al-Qahira, better known to Westerners as Cairo. Cairo is one of the world's great historic cities. Over 7 million people live here, very nearly as many as New York, rather more than London. To the southwest, Cairo merges into the city of Al-Jizan, also known as Giza, another 2.5 million people, and home to one of the most famous landmarks on Earth, the pyramids. Beyond them, civilization suddenly runs out. The pyramids sit on the edge of a world that to the ancient Egyptians was the realm of the dead. This is the desert, and into its heart is where Christian Loeben's quest is taking him. Egypt is a country of 1 million square kilometers. Its people and its history have been concentrated in one river valley, that of the Nile. Yet most of the land is accounted for by 3 deserts: the Sinai, the eastern between the Nile and the Red Sea, and the huge western desert, 2/3 of the area of the country and part of the Great Sahara. The Western Desert is one of the most beautiful and one of the driest places on Earth. Cambyses II, the first Persian ruler of Egypt in the 6th century BC, managed to lose an entire army of 50,000 men here. But under the shifting sands lies an aquifer, an underground reservoir that contains huge quantities of trapped water. In certain places, this water comes close to the surface, where springs and wells create fertile oases. There are 5 major oases in the Western Desert. Furthest from Cairo, and 300 kilometers from the Nile, is Dakhla. After a long, bumpy, dusty ride, Christian arrives in the past. Time appears to have stood still in Dakhla. It's the only place in Egypt where water wheels driven by buffalo are not only still in use, but still being made. Christian believes that these age-old traditions are a way of understanding the present day in Egypt.
As an Egyptologist, you come to modern Egypt to do research on very old things. And many colleagues forget that modern Egypt, and especially places like Dakhla, show an absolute continuity of the life of ancient Egypt. And understanding modern Egypt can actually help to understand ancient Egypt.
Christian's point of contact is the Dakhla Oasis project, a coalition of international scientists who've been investigating the area since 1978. Its main aim is to understand the relationship between human activity and environmental change in an isolated area. But researchers from various disciplines join the team from time to time. Between them, they've thrown new light on what was happening in an area of ancient Egypt far away from the well-investigated Nile Valley. Tony Mills has been head of the project since it was set up.
So, one of the best things that we found this year is this, well, it's the inside of a horn core.
He explains that they have found evidence of human occupation of the oasis going back 400,000 years. Perhaps more surprisingly, it's only in the last 7,000 or 8,000 years that the oasis has been surrounded by desert.
Before that, there's a period of several thousand years when the eastern Sahara is green. There's plenty of water on the surface and grazing for animals.
Archaeological remains show that the wildlife then was typical of today's sub-Saharan grasslands. A few centuries after the Great Pyramids, built around 2,500 BC, the Dakhla Oasis appeared on the map of the Egyptian rulers. There is evidence of a trade in luxury goods, ivory, ebony, ostrich feathers, up the Nile to the south. Mill speculates that there was also a trade across the desert to the west, perhaps in gold, perhaps slaves.
I think their motivation really was quite simply economic, and the reason they came here to the Dakhla Oasis, I think, was it's the westernmost area where they could establish a strong base camp.
And for 2,000 years, Dakhla seemed destined to remain a caravan base. Then, world-changing events began to happen not far away. All around the Mediterranean, Rome was conquering its way to an empire. Spain, Greece and Carthage had fallen, followed by Gaul and Syria. Then, in 31 BC, the Egyptian queen Cleopatra and her lover, Marcus Antonius, were defeated by his brother-in-law, Octavian, the powerful Roman consul, who thus seized the throne of Egypt. It was an event that the residents of this desert outpost probably didn't even know had happened. But it was soon to change their lives more than they could ever have imagined. Today, it might seem difficult to believe that life in the various small towns and villages around the Dakhla Oasis has ever changed dramatically. The womenfolk still mix dough in open courtyards and bake it in wood-burning ovens. Others slowly and painstakingly hand-weave cloth. Potters turn elongated water bottles on their wheels. The shape hasn't changed in 1,000 years. Craftsmen still make bricks from mud and straw, as they have since prehistory. But there is more to Dakhla than today's simple mud brick houses. Some residents have grander dwellings. They weren't built recently. And when they were built, they weren't intended as houses, at least not in the conventional sense. They were dwellings, all right, for the dead. Many of the houses found here were in fact once tombs. Dakhla, like so many other sites in Egypt, is testament to the importance of the celebration of life after death to the ancient Egyptians. Enjoyable as he finds it to pass time observing life in the oases today, Christian has an appointment with the past, with the spirit of the man who brought him out here to the desert. He's off to visit the ruins which Gerhard Rolfs stumbled across some 130 years ago. Olaf Karper, a Dutch Egyptologist working with the Dakhla Oasis project, shows Christian around the site of this classic Egyptian temple.
Excellent. Yes, let you go.
Dedicated to the gods Amun, Mut, and Khonsu, the temple at Deir el-Hagar must have been a magnificent building. Inside was an open court flanked by columns, perhaps inspired by the Avenue of Rams at the fabulous Karnak temple in Luxor. To remove any doubt that this is Rolf's ruin, Christian finds his party's names carved neatly into one of the columns. He wonders who would have built such a magnificent temple in the middle of nowhere. He's about to discover the first of several surprises that Dakhla has in store for him.
Face with the crown.
The superb reliefs and hieroglyphics that adorn the temple show something extraordinary. Among them can be seen representations of Egyptian gods accepting an offering from a pharaoh. Nothing particularly remarkable in that, except in one rather important detail. The hieroglyphs show, quite clearly, that the pharaoh is not Egyptian, as Olaf Karper explains.
This here is an inscription dedicating the temple, or this part of the temple, to the god Amun. And here we have the cartouche of the emperor Titus. Titus Caesar, it says, and then it says he built this beautiful temple to his father Amun.
Every pharaoh had a complex series of names and titles represented by hieroglyphs contained within an oblong border called a cartouche. This became, as it were, the pharaoh's own personal logo. Here, Titus Caesar is represented by the symbols Ti, Tos, Si, Sir. Titus was the Roman emperor between 79 and 81 BC, some 100 years after Egypt had fallen under Roman dominion. He's not alone on the walls of this mysterious temple. The hieroglyphics in other parts of the complex indicate two of Titus's predecessors, Nero and Vespasian. The depiction of Roman emperors on an Egyptian temple might at first sight seem surprising. Would the Egyptians themselves have wanted to include representations of foreigners, those of another faith, on their sacred buildings? Could it mean, therefore, that it was the Romans who built this splendid Egyptian temple? The answer is apparently not. Alan Bowman is Professor of Ancient History at Britain's Oxford University and is an authority on Egypt's Roman period.
The Egyptian temple tradition, which incorporated the Egyptian pharaohs in the traditional Egyptian iconography, goes back thousands of years. Whoever the monarch was, they would be depicted as Egyptian pharaohs. From the point of view of the local worshipper, who, after all, even in the traditional Egyptian pharaonic period, is very unlikely to have cast eyes on the pharaoh himself, it wouldn't make a heck of a lot of difference whether it was a Greek monarch or a Roman emperor.
Roman emperors are represented on the walls, but that has no relation at all to what the Roman emperors were doing at home in Italy. They didn't know about this temple, probably.
So it was the Egyptians who represented the Roman emperors on their temple walls. So far, there is no evidence to suggest that the temple at Deir al-Hagar was built by the Romans. The architecture was certainly typical pharaonic Egyptian. But what of other types of buildings? Further investigations suggest that the Roman influence appears to have been far-reaching. Christian continues his search. Australian Colin Hope is another archaeologist working in Dakhla. He takes Christian to the site of Kelis, near the present-day village of Ismad. This was probably the Roman administrative capital of the area. Hope has uncovered a large building, perhaps the town hall, which appears to have been transported straight from Rome.
Wall paintings, which you can see here, show the typical panel design, then the top of a column, which would have had a Corinthian capital. There is then part of a floral frieze, which is now gone from this section, but these paintings cover the walls for about 2 meters in depth. We are in a room that would have stood 8 meters high, and it may well have been an open colonnaded hall, but the entire roof was covered in wall paintings as well, all completely of the classical tradition. There's absolutely nothing in this building that's Egyptian.
Does this mean that while they left religious buildings to the Egyptians, the Romans created the civic buildings? Again, this is not the whole story. Prior to the arrival of Alexander the Great, the Egyptians had no use for this sort of building.
Such administration as there was locally tended to be conducted within or around the local Egyptian temples. The Greeks and Romans is different. They have public administrative buildings. There is no native Egyptian architectural tradition which would produce buildings of this sort.
Building design was an indicator of the prevailing architectural style rather than the nationality of the architect. In the case of the temples, there was a long local history. Civic buildings, on the other hand, were a new thing and reflected contemporary design, which was classical Roman. Olaf Kapper again.
There's paneling exactly as in Pompeii. This is classical art of the time when it was built. Whereas the religious building, the temple itself, was very important to keep that in the local pharaonic tradition, as it was, for thousands of years before. But as soon as you step out of the doors of the temple, you find that everything is in a modern style of the Roman period.
Everywhere throughout the 2,000 square kilometers of the Dakhla oasis are extensive ruins, most of them dating from the Roman period. It was clearly a very large settlement. Christian tries to picture the community that must once have thrived here, as far removed from today's village life as the great metropolis of Cairo across the desert, or indeed Berlin, from where he had begun his journey. Reminded of the event that precipitated his rush to get to Egypt, he's keen to try and find where Rolfs might have discovered the skull. The most likely place is up in the hills near the temple, where there are a series of ancient tombs. Again, Christian finds himself delving back into history. But this time, he's not searching for something already catalogued in a dusty archive. Now he's at the source, digging in the sands of time for first-hand evidence of a society that existed 2,000 years ago. After so much time, he hopes to find some trace, some sign, something which linked the skull in Berlin with this place. This time, Dackler delivers a shocker. Mummies, hundreds of them. So many Rome-age tombs have been found in Dackler that incredibly, some still contain their occupants. Colin Hope provides insight.
Here we have a fragment of linen, the sort of material that would have been used to wrap the bodies that would be buried in these tombs. The tombs, unfortunately, have all been looted in antiquity, but what we find are the fragments of the skeletons, the actual mummified bodies, the coffins in which they were placed, and the objects that were buried in the tomb with them.
Mummification was an expensive business, associated in dynastic Egypt with the pharaoh and his immediate entourage. But here, in the middle of nowhere, there appears to have been a whole society of nouveau riche who could all afford the royal after-death treatment. Who were these people? They must have been wealthy, which probably meant part of the ruling elite. But at that time, Egypt was ruled by Rome. Could there have been an enclave of aristocratic Romans who, in an attempt to gain immortality, had adopted the age-old Egyptian custom of mummification? Despite the evidence, Christian finds this difficult to believe. Wouldn't such a radical shift in the Romans' beliefs have been documented somewhere? To the Egyptians, it was vital to keep the body preserved. In order to live for eternity in the kingdom of Osiris, god of the underworld, the individual had to survive in both physical and spiritual forms. Originally, corpses were buried directly in the desert sand, which preserved them remarkably well. But with the development of more sophisticated beliefs, it became normal practice to place the body in a coffin which carried an image of the deceased. This body-shaped sarcophagus provided a physical substitute for the soul to inhabit, should the actual corpse be accidentally destroyed. Ironically, the insurance policy of a substitute body, the coffin, isolated the real body from the desiccating effect of the sand, and it rotted very quickly. So a method of preservation was developed that involved removing the internal organs, except the heart, and covering the corpse with natron, a natural salt compound. The principal organs, liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, were embalmed separately and stored in jars. The brain wasn't considered important and was scooped out through the nose and discarded. The heart was left in the body because the Egyptians believed it was where a person's intellect lay. For its owner to gain eternal life, the heart had to balance the weight of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. Watching over the mummification would have been the jackal-headed god Anubis. He might also have nudged Maat's scales to ensure the deceased passed safely into the underworld. After 40 days of being covered with natron, the body was washed and coated with resin. Finally, it was ceremoniously wrapped in many sheets and strips of linen, with pieces of personal jewelry and magic amulets placed between the layers. The bandaging would take another 15 days to complete. The entire process took 70 days, from death to burial. Could Romans have embraced a radical departure from their own belief system? If it could be shown that the local elite, the only people likely to be wealthy enough, were in fact Romans, then there would seem to be a strong case for this argument, a case that appears to be supported by crucial archaeological finds at several Romano-Egyptian sites. Pharaonic mummies had plaster masks over the faces to represent the deceased. Many of the mummies from the Roman period had amazingly detailed portraits, which look for all the world like classical paintings and nothing like any earlier form of Egyptian art. The figures in the portraits, in their dress, their hairstyles, and their makeup, give every appearance of being Roman. Is it so surprising that the prospect of eternal life might have attracted the Romans? It wasn't, after all, something that was clearly elaborated by their own religion. And we do know that one Egyptian deity held a particular fascination for them. The goddess Isis was worshipped throughout the Roman world, and part of the appeal must have been a hope for the afterlife. In traditional Egyptian mythology, Isis was the wife of Osiris, god of the dead. She stood for many qualities, including an association with immortality. And she had a brother-in-law called Seth. Unlike the belligerent Romans, the Egyptians didn't have a dominant god of war, but they did have Seth. Depicted as a mysterious animal, he was the bad boy of the Egyptian pantheon. He was the god of chaos and confusion, who murdered his brother Osiris. He became patron of the desert and of foreign lands. An appealing god, therefore, to the two cohorts of Roman soldiers thought to have been stationed in Dakhla to protect Egypt's western front. Is it possible that so far from home, these conquering warriors passed their time dabbling in a new religion? In a different part of the oasis lie the ruins of another large temple, and this one's dedicated to Seth. The walls standing today date from the Roman period, though, as Christian has discovered, the temple is very much older than that.
The god Seth is a very ancient god, and recent excavations have shown that he had a temple here already 4,000 years ago. And this temple continued to exist until the Roman times.
Christian has one big question on his mind. Did a community of Romans living in Dakhla go native and embrace the local belief system? Inspired perhaps by the harsh environment surrounding the oasis, and fascinated with the prospect of life after death. The hypothesis is supported by a number of arguments. Romans were fascinated by the goddess Isis. Another god, Seth, embodied characteristics that might have appealed to Roman warriors. And mummy portraits from Dakhla's heyday found elsewhere in Egypt depict people that appear to be native Romans. Furthermore, though Christian has learned that it was the Egyptians who put Roman emperors on the walls of their temples, it's possible that this gesture encouraged the emperor's Roman subjects to become interested in Egyptian religion. Proof for the theory hinges on the issue of who exactly were the elite here. Who were the people who could afford mummification? Despite the telling circumstantial evidence, the archaeologists who've been studying the oasis have concluded that they probably weren't Romans.
I don't think the Romans probably ever came out here. It's very far away. I mean, far away from Rome, or even from the center of the political government in Alexandria. And I think it was all just administered on a local basis.
When we talk about Roman period Egypt, the number of actual Romans from Italy was very few, and they would be concentrated in the administrative center at Alexandria. There may never have been a Roman in charge of Dakhla.
They're all Egyptians who are dying and being buried here.
These would undoubtedly have been the local Egyptian population, probably the more wealthier of the residents at the village, undoubtedly not actual Romans.
It appears that Dakhla was a thriving cosmopolitan metropolis where the Egyptian subjects, rather than Roman rulers, lived like lords and died like kings. But how can the mummy portraits be explained? Though none have yet been found in Dakhla, they do appear to be the most striking evidence of Romans adopting Egyptian ways.
Bodies that are buried in the coffins you will have seen are Egyptians. But when you look at the faces on the actual paintings themselves, the style reflects Greek and particularly Roman painting styles. So when you actually look at them, you think you're looking at a non-Egyptian, in other words, a Roman.
But instead, they were in fact wealthy Egyptians who could afford to observe mummification, but in a style that followed the imperial fashion of the time. Oxford's Professor Alan Bowman explains.
These people would have been high-status people, local landowners, almost certainly who made most of their money out of agricultural products, growing them and trading in them. People who found this funerary iconography most attractive would have been those who wished to portray themselves as people of high prestige within the local elite context. So we're talking here about people who would have had connections with local Roman or Roman-imposed administrators and, on the whole, the wealthier sections of the population.
They probably dressed as Romans in life, and in death, their portraits represented this Roman style, both in the way they appeared and in the way that the paintings were executed. Regardless of how many Romans lived here, what is not in doubt is that during the Roman period, Dakhla was a thriving community. Why here? Why at a remote oasis in the middle of one of the world's most inhospitable places? To answer this question, we have to ask another. What was the main reason for Rome to absorb Egypt into its empire?
Egypt was extremely wealthy. It was wealthy because the agricultural base was extremely fertile. And in the 1st century BC, the Romans were certainly attracted, hugely attracted, by the wealth which Egypt could provide. Individual Romans like Caesar and Pompey were certainly very conscious of the wealth which could be gained from Egypt, both in terms of state revenues and in terms of the extent to which they, as individuals, could enrich themselves, which Roman commanders and generals were not averse to doing whilst out on official business. Egypt contributed as much income to the Roman state treasury as all of the provinces of Gaul combined.
Tony Mills in Dakhla agrees.
I think it's like colonialism in the 19th and 20th centuries, anywhere in the world. Colonial powers, as it were simply in a particular place to extract as much as possible of the natural commodities, wood or coffee beans or whatever it is, out of the local economy.
But it wasn't all bad news for Egypt. The new regime worked in Dakhla's favour.
The Roman contribution to the growth of the oasis certainly would have to be seen in terms of improvements in agricultural technology, irrigation systems, transport, communication routes, economic benefits which flowed from higher agricultural production. In other words, the range of products which are attested as having come out of the agricultural economy of the oasis, and dates, wine, grain, and a whole variety of products.
So there are a great number of Roman monuments, together with a large community of farmhouses, villages, and all these kinds of things, aqueducts and so on, which go to make up a thriving farming community here. And I think the Romans probably encouraged migrations by providing the sorts of things like seed corn and agricultural implements. It would seem that the Roman agricultural development scheme was successful for 3 or 4 centuries.
One of the signs of the fact that Egypt was so vital to the Roman economy and to the Roman administration in general was the fact that at the very beginning, Augustus, the Emperor Augustus, or Octavian as he then was, created a new system which he personally appointed the provincial governor. Militarily, the province was controlled by a force of at first 3 legions, then reduced to 2 and then reduced to 1. And a group of auxiliary units, about 9 auxiliary units of 500 men each. So it's not a huge number of military personnel.
Yet they managed to control a country the size of Italy, France and Britain combined. How did the Romans rule such a large and sophisticated country with such apparent lack of effort? Firstly, there was the issue of geography.
One of the interesting and important features of the province of Egypt itself is that because there is only really one major communication route, control of the province depends on control of the Nile Delta and the valley.
But perhaps more significant was the rigidly bureaucratic way in which the country had been governed by the Ptolemies for 3 centuries, to which the huge amount of surviving written material is eloquent testimony.
When the Romans arrived in Egypt, what they found was a very highly developed and hierarchical bureaucracy, and quite a lot of the infrastructure clearly remained in place. The Roman government imposed a layer or 2 of upper-level administrators who would have been Romans, but the local officials who controlled the regions and the districts and the towns and the villages were, to all intents and purposes, part of the same network which had already been developed under the Ptolemaic monarchs.
This was in marked contrast to the situation in Britain, for example, where prior to the arrival of the Romans, the country consisted of a scattered assortment of warring tribes. It's clear from the temple at Dakhla that the Romans were not interested in interfering with the belief systems of their foreign subjects. Indeed, the local administrator, who was probably an Egyptian appointed by central government in Alexandria, was most likely responsible for organizing the temple's construction, a move designed to be popular with the people. From their side, the Egyptians appear to have been remarkably open-minded in their attitude towards their rulers. The passing of Ptolemaic rule was probably unmourned, particularly in the case of Dakhla, whose residents stood to benefit from the investment that the Romans were obviously making in the oasis. So they were not likely to object to being governed from afar on ideological grounds. Instead, they seem to have accepted the emperor as pharaoh and to have viewed Roman art and design as a new fashion to be embraced. Egyptian statues from that period depict ordinary people wearing classical costume. And not only ordinary people. A striking illustration of lack of religious preciousness are the statues that have been found showing Egyptian gods, particularly Horus, depicted as Roman soldiers or noblemen. The same indifference to nationality and a remarkable freedom of expression extended to the informal decoration of their temples.
Standing here in one of the entrances to the temple complex, and we have a part of the original plastering preserved, and that's very special because the visitors to this temple complex left graffiti. They left their names written in Greek, and they left images of the gods they came to worship, so it really tells us something about the time. And what we see here, the main images are Egyptian. There is Thoth the baboon, and there is a ram of the god Ammon of the temple. But here we have a god who is really different in many aspects. He looks really Greek, he doesn't look Egyptian anymore. The face is in front of you, whereas the Egyptian images are always sideways. He has a wild beard, as the Greek gods have. But there are also a few Egyptian parts to this image. There's a crown of the god Osiris, and at the temples there are small horns, and then the horns of the wither of Ammon. So it's a wonderful mixture of 2 cultures in one image, Egyptian and Greek.
Dakhla must have been a remarkable jewel in the desert, in an oasis that today gives the impression of a simple rural way of life. there was once a rich, cosmopolitan society where minds were open enough for cultures to mix.
Commodities were brought into the oasis from all around the Roman world. We have, for example, fish being brought in from Spain, and we've actually found the jars that fish came in here at this site. So it participated in the full, let's say, network of Roman exchange around the Mediterranean. We have examples of glass made during the Roman period, the faience, the ceramic. All of it is very, very typical of what we'd call Roman period in Egypt.
But almost inevitably, this earthly paradise wasn't to last.
I think it was quite successful until the Roman Empire itself divided and the whole trading regime probably collapsed at that point, which must have been very hard on the local farmers. They would have been overproducing to supply this huge world market, which all of a sudden disappeared. So it's always the poor farmer who gets it in the neck in any country when this sort of thing happens.
The population began to drift away towards the east, perhaps attracted to the great cities of the Nile Valley and Delta. Within a few hundred years, Dakla's grand buildings had disappeared under the shifting sands, to remain preserved for 1,000 more. It's ironic, but sadly inevitable, that their discovery and exposure is now putting them in jeopardy.
Every time I look at this scene, I'm sort of struck by the fact how it's all bleaching away. It seems to get more every year. And that shows how much haste we must make, really, in recording all of this. When you look at the skirt here of the pharaoh, there's so much detail in it. Small details which you can't see in the relief at all. And this must all be documented in some way before it really disappears.
Gone are the days when explorers would return home with trunks full of the treasures they had discovered. Christian instead contributes to the research effort by carefully tracing the details of the temple carvings. Christian set out on his adventure to Dakhla with an old skull and a faded photograph of an ancient temple. He little expected to find such puzzling evidence of the Roman occupation of Egypt in this faraway oasis. Still less did he think that in a distant oasis, in the middle of a huge desert, he would discover that the local Egyptians had developed, with the help of Roman investment and inspiration, a sophisticated, cosmopolitan, outward-looking society. He'll return to his studies in Berlin with his drawings and a new understanding of how two of history's greatest nations could bond together in life and eventually in death.